We create rubbish all the time, non-stop, loads of rubbish, more and more rubbish. In Gipuzkoa, we still throw away nearly 3 times what Europe allows us into waste landfills, and the rubbish tips are filling up. Europe rang the alarm bell in 2012. By 2020, it will not be possible to burn or bury waste that can be recycled. In other words, we have to turn waste into a resource. 85% of the waste we generate is recyclable, and the remaining 15% is non-recyclable. There are 5 steps in the European directive about waste management. The first norm is to reduce waste generation, and for that to happen, citizens must become aware of the problem. The second is that everything that can be reused must be reused. The third is that everything that can be recycled must be recycled. The fourth is that things which cannot be reused or recycled must be made use of in other ways, for example, to generate energy. And finally, the 5th norm says that the remaining portion, which cannot be reused or recycled, must be disposed of. Shouldn't that be the other way round? Dispose of waste, but isn't that a last resort option? But what makes rubbish so attractive? What in fact is rubbish really? Rubbish is money. Rubbish is big business. Collecting rubbish, transporting it, storing it and managing it. That brings a few people big profits, but it's a terrible waste for public institutions and for citizens. The more tons of rubbish that are created and collected on a large scale, the more profits there will be for those few people. At the same time, collecting rubbish in that way means that we can make no use of loads of recyclable materials that are worth a lot of money. In Gipuzkoa, we chuck 18 million euros into the waste landfills every year. The whole mass rubbish collection thing is great business for a few people, but the waste landfills are too full. They're overflowing. It's an extreme situation, and they stink.
Don't worry, there is a solution. The incinerator is what's going to make the rubbish disappear. It won't stink, and rubbish won't ever get in your way again.
But rubbish doesn't disappear, it gets transformed. On the one hand, it creates toxic emissions, CO2, dioxin, nitrogen acid, zinc, furan, cadmium. On the other hand, when it is burnt, what was waste becomes toxic dust and ashes, dangerous material. That toxic dust and ash has to be kept in waste landfills, but not in any waste landfills. Has to be kept in special rubbish tips for dangerous materials. And those rubbish tips too have to be built, and the toxic materials have to be transported there. And who's going to do that? Who wants to have a rubbish tip next to their home? And who wants a rubbish tip next to someone else's home? Some research shows that the chance of getting cancer is 9 times greater for people who live near rubbish tips. What's more, hasn't Europe laid down that from 2020 nothing that can be either reused or recycled can be burnt? Why build an incinerator if we won't be able to use it?
Our rubbish tips are full up. There is no other way. We need an incinerator. That will save us. Otherwise, we'll disappear under the trash.
How about if we try to create less rubbish? An incinerator is a giant mouth you have to keep on feeding. If we created less rubbish, we wouldn't need an incinerator, and we'd need fewer waste landfills. If we reuse and recycle, there's no need for an incinerator, because we won't have anything to dispose of.
In 2013, 260,000 tons of rubbish will be thrown into the tips. What will we do with all that rubbish?
In fact, we don't create enough rubbish to justify having an incinerator. We send less and less rubbish to be landfilled. This year, we're going to send around 195,000 tons of rubbish to the tips, 65,000 tons less than was foreseen, 25% less than foreseen. And even so, we're still sending much more than Europe tells us to send to waste landfills.
We'll create green electricity by burning the rubbish.
Green energy by burning rubbish? To get some energy, at least a few tons are needed, and nowadays we don't create as much as that. How can we do that then? By importing rubbish? By burning what we should reuse or recycle too? Do we really need an incinerator? And meanwhile, the incinerator project has created a situation which few people expected. A zero-waste movement has sprung up and spread. Even so, we have to build an incinerator. We have to. It was just before the elections. Just before a political change, the incinerator had to be started on so nobody could stop it. The incinerator was going to cost 300 million euros, with another 100 million euros for financial costs, and another 100 million for work to be carried out over the next 10 years. 500 million euros of public money altogether. The banks were asked for loans that all of us would have to pay over the next 20 years. The banks offered tough conditions, including swap toxic financial packages. As well as paying interest on the loans, we citizens had to pay the banks extra money each month, whether the requested money was used or not, whether the incinerator was built or not. And finally, the incinerator is not going to be built. In the end, the people of Gipuzkoa have to pay a portion of a project for something we're not going to use. But the most important thing is that we're saving millions of euros that were going to be wasted on an incinerator we didn't need. What's more, waste sorting at source is being used in more and more places throughout Gipuzkoa. Waste is being reused and recycled more and more. We're creating less and less tons of waste. For once, we're doing what Europe tells us to. We, the citizens, are all going to benefit from this process that just started.
You win!